the letter that was delivered 50 years later and wasn't for who we thought, story based on real events. For decades, a letter remained forgotten inside a book in a public library. It wasn't hidden on purpose, nor was it protected with any special care. It just sat there, silent, moving through time without a rush, as if it knew the right moment to be found hadn't arrived yet. The library was in a small town, the kind where change happens slowly. The building was old, made of time-darkened bricks, with tall windows and long corridors that creaked slightly when someone walked. The constant smell was a mix of aged paper, dust, and silence. People came and went every day, but almost no one really looked at the place. The library existed more as a habit than a living space. Staff members rotated over the years. Some worked there for decades, others for just a few months. Books were borrowed, returned, forgotten, rediscovered. Shelves were reorganized, sections moved. And yet, that letter remained intact, folded carefully between pages that almost no one flipped through anymore. It had been written in the early 1970s. The paper was thin, slightly yellowed, and the writing was done by hand with a calm, steady, but hesitant script. There was no envelope, no stamp, no recipient's name, just a date at the top of the page, as if the writer wanted to mark that moment for themselves. For almost 50 years, no one noticed it was there. Until, on an ordinary afternoon, nothing special, a librarian decided to reorganize an old section of the library. It was a rarely visited section filled with technical books, forgotten biographies, and works that had lost relevance over time. Most people just walked right past those shelves as if they didn't even exist. The librarian was working alone that day. The place was quiet, interrupted only by the distant sound of an old clock ticking away the hours. As she pulled a book from the shelf to clean it, something fell to the floor. A folded piece of paper. At first, she thought it was just an old bookmark, a common sight in old libraries. But as she bent down to pick it up, she noticed the date written at the top. That immediately caught her attention. It was too old to be recent, but not old enough to be considered historical. Driven by curiosity, she sat down at a nearby table and began to read. The letter held no great revelations. It didn't speak of important events or historical facts. There were no famous names, no landmark moments. It was just someone writing about their own life, about doubts that seemed small but carried an enormous weight. It spoke of difficult choices, about the fear of making a mistake, about the feeling of being behind the world. The author mentioned the pressure of deciding the future too soon, of choosing a definitive path when still feeling lost. It spoke of the fear of disappointing family, of not living up to expectations, of choosing security over meaning. But at the same time, the letter carried a sincere attempt at courage. The author wrote like someone trying to convince themselves of something, like someone who needed to hear those words as much as they needed to write them. He spoke about the importance of being honest with oneself, about the need to accept that not all answers come quickly, about the idea that perhaps there is no right path, but only paths that make more sense for who we are at that moment. The letter ended with a simple, almost timid, but powerful sentence. If you are reading this, maybe you need to hear exactly what I also needed to hear. There was no signature. The librarian fell silent for a few seconds after she finished reading. There was something about that letter that didn't feel stuck in the past. On the contrary, it sounded incredibly current, as if someone had written it that very week. She showed the letter to other employees. Some found it interesting. Others said it was just a beautiful text of no great importance. But something different began to happen as more people gained access to that reading. The library decided to make a copy of the letter and put it on a small board, without explanations, without context, without saying who had written it or when. just the text. And then, slowly and silently, the letter began to do something unexpected. People would read it and stand still for a few minutes. Some returned days later to reread it. Others commented that they felt strangely touched, as if those words had been written specifically for them. Some began to change small things in their routines. Nothing drastic, nothing flashy, just different choices. A woman decided to go back to studying after years of postponing it. A man resigned from a job that had made him unhappy for decades. Someone decided to reconcile with a distant relative. Others simply began to allow themselves to rest more, to be less demanding of themselves.
The letter gave no direct advice. It didn't say what to do. It just created space for reflection, and that seemed to be enough. Over time, the story caught the attention of local researchers. They wanted to know who had written that letter and how it had ended up there. They began to investigate old library records, loan lists, names of patrons from the 1970s. After months of research, a pattern emerged. There was a young university student who frequented the library very regularly at that time. He borrowed many books, especially on philosophy, literature, and life choices. His name appeared repeatedly in the records ... until it disappeared completely. Shortly after the date of the letter, he stopped coming to the library. They found out that he had moved out of town shortly thereafter. He changed states. He dropped out of the course he was taking. He pursued a completely different career from what he had originally planned. He never published any books. He never became known. He lived a simple, discreet life, far from any public spotlight. And he never returned to that library. After much insistence, they managed to locate him. He was already an elderly man when he was contacted. One of the researchers carefully explained the situation. He spoke about the letter. He spoke about the impact it was having now, 50 years later. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then the man replied with something no one expected. He said that the letter had not been written for someone else. It was for himself. He had written the letter in a moment of deep doubt when he didn't know which decision to make. He put it inside the book as a way to keep those words safe, as if he wanted to find them in the future, when he was more lost or needed a reminder of what truly mattered. But he never went back for it. Life happened, decisions were made. He moved on without ever thinking about that letter again. When asked how he felt, knowing that so many people were being impacted by those words now, he replied with simplicity and no drama. Maybe I never read the letter, but it seems I lived by it. And that's when everyone understood the true meaning of that story. The letter was delivered ... not to the one it was written for, not at the right time, not in the planned way, but to those who needed it. Perhaps it's like that with many things in life. Some messages don't arrive when we expect them. Some never reach the destination we imagined, but still, they fulfill their purpose. Because sometimes what transforms people is not the intention, nor the control, nor the perfect plan. It's the encounter.